So I would like to welcome you all and thank you for joining us. We're absolutely delighted today. Quorum is thrilled to welcome Lori Trawinski, who is a thought leader on age diversity and inclusion in the workforce. With PhD in economics and finance, an MA in international economics, and a BA in financial management from Catholic University, prepared and well equipped for the work that she does at the AARP Public Policy Institute, where she conducts research on policy issues ranging from age diversity in the workplace to mortgage foreclosures, student loans, and consumer credit. She led a multi-year initiative, The Future of Women at 50 Plus, that examined employment challenges faced by older Americans. Her groundbreaking report, Disrupting Aging in the Workplace, Profiles in Intergenerational Diversity Leadership, serves as a reference for organizations seeking to address age within their DEI strategies. She also recently spoke to a Senate Special Committee on Aging, where she assures us that it's a much tougher audience than she expects Quorum to be, and I have no doubt that will be true. Besides all of this, Lori is a professional stand-up comedian, delivering humorous, engaging, and energetic presentations. Without any further, I'm going to turn it over to Lori. And again, Lori, thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you, Diane, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. This is a real honor for me because there are many things I like to do, but none I like to do more than public speaking and talking about age. So I just wanted to share a little bit more about myself with you. I'm actually in the midst of a very long and varied work life that really consists of several careers. I started out as a park ranger, an accountant. I was an economist. I worked for the US government. I've done research on the bond markets. I've been a policy advisor, a comedian, a professor, and a diversity practitioner. So who knows what I'll be next? I can guarantee you I'm not done. And it's relevant for our conversation today. And the reason it's relevant is, I'm going to talk about age. And I was surprised to see so many people sign up for this event because it seems to be the kind of topic that sends most people running away. People just, you're uncomfortable talking about age. And so today I want to talk a little bit about why that is. In the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion, age is often one of the most overlooked dimensions in DEI strategy. And I find this really odd because it is the one dimension of diversity that affects everyone, right? Each and every one of us have an age. We have at least one age. Some of us have two, right? There's the age on your driver's license, and then the age that you reveal if someone asks you how old you are, right? So that's another symptom of how we feel about age in this country. And the other thing about age is our view of it changes throughout our life. If you think about it, when you have a baby and your kids are, sort of from ages 1 to 10, birthdays are a really big deal. And, we have major parties and we celebrate and it's the greatest thing. And then things calm down. And then around age 15, if you are part of the Latina community, you have the quinceañera and you have a big party and celebrate, your young daughter at that point. For the rest of us, 16 is a big deal. When I was in school, the Sweet 16 party was a really big thing. Everybody got a surprise party. And that was really odd, right? Because we were all surprised, but we all got the party and we were surprised anyway. And I'm like, how did that happen? And then, things calm down after 16. And when you get to be 21, that's a whole different thing, right? Because the 21st birthday, we celebrate that because then we can go to the casino or we can go to our favorite restaurant or other facility and order the drink that we've been secretly enjoying for years, but now we can do so legally. So, another another transitional time for us, but again, still a positive event. Once you hit about 30, things get a little bit negative. If you look at the birthday cards available, they start to turn kind of mean. And then once you hit 50, forget it. You get to the 50th birthday, the cards say, everything's downhill. Your best years are behind you. There's not a lot of positivity going on. And I had a friend who turned 50 when, I was much younger than the age of 50, and I signed her up for an AARP card. And I thought it was really funny. And I didn't work for AARP at the time. But then a number of years later, I turned 50. And surprisingly, it was a little bit less funny because you're facing a different reality. So there's, so what's behind our feelings of age? And, and why is it okay to go to the store and buy a card and see it filled with negativity? There is some good news though, right? Once you get to 80 or 90 or 100, the cards do turn positive. And at those points, we're like, wow, now we are recognizing the gift of longevity. For people who are lucky enough to enjoy longer lives, we celebrate that. But again, there's a 30-year lull in there before we have a positive view of what's happening. So let's think about this also. I'm talking about longevity, and we're seeing that a lot of people are living longer than ever before. And while it's true that the benefits of longevity are not equally available to all facets of our population, for those people who do have the benefit of living longer, they also have the challenge of figuring out how to finance these longer lives. And while we have better medication and better health care than we used to, than we've had ever before, there's another side to the longevity equation, which is how are we going to finance 30 years of potential retirement? We know that Social Security is not the kind of program that is going to provide enough money for people to live comfortably as they age, if that is the sole source of income. We know that corporate pensions are not really available for most. There are a few lucky people who have access to a government pension, or, you may work for an organization that provides one. But if you don't, you have to really rely on some personal savings to get you through. So what are the implications for people, for women, and for our workforce? Well, it means that people are going to need or want to work longer. And we are seeing that the fastest growing part of the workforce, or at least prior to the pandemic, the 65 plus was expected to see stronger growth than some of the other age groups. And that's reflective of two things. It's either people's need to work longer or the desire to work longer. And if we're living longer and if we're healthy, we probably want to stay connected with people more and have some social connections and interactions. And so oftentimes, your workplace can be a source of that kind of interaction. But as uncomfortable as we feel about age and talking about it, it's really relevant for our workforce in today's world. In a lot of places, we have 5 generations of people working side by side. And so that's a lot of difference, right? It's different age groups, it's different experiences, it's perspectives, and it's interests and working styles. And so you put 5 generations together, and you need to do some things to make sure that you can work well together. And so it's worth taking the time to think about what some of these things might be. And in a little while, we'll talk more about that. But the other point I want to make at this point is you can't talk about age in the workplace unless you mention ageism. And people often refer to ageism as the last acceptable ism in our society. And we think we refer to it in this manner because you can go and buy the birthday card that has an insult for an older person. but there are you couldn't buy a birthday card that makes a racial or ethnic joke, or at least I hope you can't, because we wouldn't want that. Just as we want to move away, from making fun of older people, just because of their age. We see ageism as, a type of discrimination. So it means we're carrying prejudice or stereotypical views against people based solely on their age. And we see this in movies, or we see it in television. We see it in advertising. If you look at a lot of ads, you see a lot of younger people driving nice cars. You see younger people with, the nice clothing. And we are starting to see a little bit more older people in some of the, the ads and the TV shows and the movies, but still, the older population is not depicted in a positive light in most of these instances. So it feeds into our overall societal view on age, and it affects us in the workplace. And so we see age discrimination in the workplace, and it can go in both directions. So we often think of it as the older person's problem when, older people are not included in training or promotion activities or, other opportunities. But sometimes we see it targeted at younger people when we say things like, oh, she's too young to lead a team, or, she just, she's not capable. Or, do we ever apply stereotypes to people we work with? Things like, well, they're lazy, or they're a slacker, they don't have a work ethic. These things may be true, but they shouldn't be attributed to an age. We most definitely have slackers in the workplace, but they're not all young. I'm just saying, not talking about my workplace though, just to be clear. Don't want to get in any trouble. But we also see age discrimination and ageism pop up in less obvious settings. So here's an example. I was at work one day, and a group of younger colleagues were discussing the happy hour they had been to the night before. And I said, "What happy hour? I wasn't invited." And he says to me, "Well, you're too old for happy hour." And I said, I was shocked, and I was a little hurt, and I was working at AARP at the time, making it even worse. And I said, you're never too old to go to happy hour, right? Everybody deserves to be happy for at least an hour, and I don't know. So was that, was that a major issue in my workplace? No, but it taught me that this young guy who I thought I was friends with, had a view of me that I had no idea he had. So, just imagine if he was a manager. Somebody trying to say something? No. He could have been my manager. He could be my manager someday, or he could be leading a team someday. And, how bad would that be if that was his attitude? So I want us to think a little bit about, when we're dealing with people, whether older people or younger people, are we making those kinds of assumptions? Are we saying those kinds of things? And even though we don't mean harm by it, are we causing people some harm in the way we're viewing them? So if you want to go a little deeper on this topic, let's think about how prevalent is age discrimination in our workplaces. So in 2020, AARP did a survey of older workers and found that 78% of older workers report that they have seen or experienced age discrimination in their workplace. 78%. That's a very high percentage of people who have observed this or experienced it. So it's a problem, right? It's very, most definitely a problem in the United States workforce. And, we have protections for older workers. And so, you might be wondering, well, we are protected, so why is this happening? Well, because you have to prove it is why it's happening. The Age Discrimination in Employment Act protects workers ages 40 and older from harassment or discrimination, and it covers any term, condition, or privilege of employment, including hiring, firing, promotion, layoffs, compensation, benefits, job assignments, and training. So it covers the full spectrum of things that a worker may experience. But the issue becomes, how do you prove that this is happening? And it's especially hard to prove age discrimination in hiring because you often, as the job applicant, don't have any data other than I applied for the job and I didn't get it. So that's a challenge in the hiring world. For people who are put out of companies, which happens quite frequently when there is a reduction of force or layoffs or reorganizations, is another easy way to put older workers out. There are things that you can do. You can go to the EEOC, you can file a complaint, an investigation will occur. But for you, as the age discrimination plaintiff, you have a higher burden of proof to prove here. Since 2009, there was a Supreme Court judgment, and it changed the way age discrimination proof was evaluated in court cases. And so since 2009, you have to prove that age discrimination is the sole reason for the adverse employment action. Prior to that, it had to be just one of several factors that could have been the cause. And now you have this higher burden of proof. And it's actually a higher burden of proof than is required if you wanted to bring a race, religion, or national origin or sex discrimination case. So we will talk a little bit more about what we're trying to do about that. But it's an unfortunate thing, and it has led to much more difficulty in age discrimination plaintiffs reaching success in the court system. But so, age discrimination, we know it's a hard thing to deal with, and we know that it comes at a cost. So I want to talk a little bit about what some of those costs are. So one cost is to the lost productivity that the US economy faces as a result of age discrimination occurring. So in 2018, AARP, along with the Economist Intelligence Unit, conducted some research and estimated that $850 billion was lost in productivity of the US economy, directly attributable to age discrimination. So when people are kept from having good jobs or being promoted or being able to be in the workforce, it has a ripple effect throughout the rest of the economy. And it's money they're not spending to consume other goods and services and contribute to the overall economy. So that's one cost. Another way to view cost is from the corporate perspective. So if you happen to work for an organization and you have some power within your company, you might want to think about it from a risk perspective and a cost perspective. So if your company is sued for age discrimination and you end up in litigation or you end up settling, that's going to cost you some money. And so are there things you can be doing in your role to prevent age discrimination from occurring and costing your company money? In 2020, over 14,000 age discrimination cases were filed with the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission. And in the year 2020, $76.3 million were awarded to claimants as a result of age discrimination alone. So that's a lot of money, $76 million. And that does not include people who actually went to court. These are only the ones that were actually settled before going to court. So that's a lot of money that's flowing out of companies as a result of this. Another way that age discrimination costs is the personal cost. And this is the cost to the people who are experiencing it. So, yes, lost wages or reduced wages are, it's the financial impact it may have on a person or a family. But the other cost is physical health and mental health. There is research that shows that the longer people are unemployed, the more likely you're going to fall into depression, face stress, have more anxiety. We know that these stressors can lead to, really health issues. And so, and it's not just mental health, it's physical health. And when people are stretched financially, they end up making decisions like skipping medications, skipping medical care. There's a whole myriad of trouble that occurs when people are stretched financially, and especially at older ages. So, the costs are huge. Age discrimination, it's economic, it's financial, it's health, it's mental health, and it costs the companies. So if it's costing so much money, it begs the question, why is this still happening? And it is still happening because all you have to do is go to the EEOC website and look at their press releases and take a look at what cases are being settled and who's involved in them. And it's government agencies, it's state agencies, it's healthcare companies, it's small employers, and sometimes it's very large ones. IBM was recently in the news quite a bit, and IBM lost the case. What they did is they put out a huge swath of older workers and then hired a lot of them back as consultants to do the same job they just got rid of them for and paid them less. And they have emails. This was the best, emails from higher ups calling the older workers, dino babies, I guess a reference to dinosaurs. And, they have this email traffic with these derogatory comments about the older workers. So it's hard to believe that in today's world, this is still going on. It's hard to believe that people don't understand that email is discoverable and that anything you're writing in your email could be in the New York Times, as in this case it was. There's no excuse, in my personal opinion, for this kind of behavior from a major corporation. So now, the other thing that I think we all need to be aware of and concerned about is age discrimination in the hiring system, particularly as technology is taking on a larger role in hiring decisions. We have artificial intelligence, and people are submitting applications. They're being screened and sorted by computers. A human may never see them, or a human may see them and be choosing the filtering functions on the other end that they're going to filter people out from. So the EEOC is aware that AI may be causing or cause for concern, and they have launched a special initiative, the Artificial Intelligence and Algorithmic Fairness Initiative, so that they can have a group of people examining these issues at companies. I teach a class at NYU on diversity metrics, and I had a student in my class tell me that using LinkedIn Recruiter, he is able to filter people out, by graduation date, by years of experience. So we've all been told, well, don't put your graduation date on your application. Well, that's fine. But then if you report 30 years of experience, they can filter you out anyway. So it's troubling to me that, it's great that I'm learning these things, but at the same time, it's very troubling to know that, you can get screened out very easily, even though technically speaking, we are legally protected, or supposed to be. So now I want to focus a little bit on, what can we do what can we do about what's happening here? Because I think I've done a pretty good job of explaining, what's happening and what legal protections we're supposed to have and how the world should work. And then the reality is it's not really, we're not living age discrimination free. And I'm not even able to tell you that we're seeing less of it over time. In fact, the AARP numbers indicate we're actually seeing more of it over time. And part of it might be because people are staying in the workforce longer. Part of it might be, something else, but it's, we're seeing more of it. So my, the rest of my chat today, what can we do about it? So I'm going to say this. I think that personally, we all have a role to play in part of this. And so I want you to look at your own beliefs about age and think about, how it may be impacting how you're viewing other people in your workplace, or, anywhere else in your life, what are your views doing to inform your outlook? So that's one thing. The other thing I would like you to think about is, as an older worker, so I personally am an older worker myself. And so I feel like, I have a role to play in that. I need to stay sharp. I need to keep learning new things. I think it doesn't really matter anymore where you work. Technology is in our workplace. And so, and our technology changes constantly. So we have to find a way to adapt to the changing technology. And I tell this to younger people too, when I go to a speaking event and, sometimes I am the oldest person in the room and it's a group of young people in technology firms, right? I tell them today's technology is great, but tomorrow there's going to be a new one. And next week, there's going to be another one. And next month, another one. And so you may think you're very current and very cool today because you are at the top of today's technology, but you're not going to have a career where that's going to be all you need to know. And so I think, I see this sometimes with people who are nearing the end of their career. I saw it with my mom. She was a municipal clerk in a small town in northern New Jersey, and they wanted her to go for a new certification for some new system. And she didn't want to go. And she was in her 70s. And I said, but Mom, go to class for a week. They'll put her up in a hotel somewhere. And she said, no, I don't want to do it. And I'm like, but Mom, I work for AARP. You have to do this. It didn't matter. And so in the end, they gave her some kind of waiver and they left her alone for a couple of years. And then ultimately she retired. But she retired on her own terms and when she wanted to. But it was sad for me to see, in the sense that, there was no reason that she couldn't go to that class. She just didn't want to. So I ask you all to think about that as you go through your career, to think about why you're saying no to particular opportunities, and to try to keep an open mind about learning new things, because you don't ever want to give people a reason to point to say why we don't need you anymore. So I think, and I don't think that's what's happening to every older person who gets put out of a job, but I ask all of us to think about, what role we can play in our own careers to try to, to keep that from happening. The other thing is to raise awareness about age bias issues. So if you see a colleague talking to a younger person and then making derogatory comments, or if you see someone commenting about an older worker and saying something stereotypical, call it out, have a conversation, because we're not going to change the way we treat one another if we don't talk about it. So if you see something that's not right, call it out, have a conversation. I think another place we have a big opportunity within our corporations, if we're with one, is to use our diversity, equity, and inclusion department as a place to bring age into the DEI conversation. And it could be in age bias training. It could be forming a multi-generational employee resource group so that people of different generations can communicate. It can be take a look at your recruiting. Does your landing page for your company have photos of 30-year-olds? Is there any diversity you're showing in your photos? Is there ever an older person? Because sometimes there's not. I am happy to say sometimes there are, but most of the time, not so much. And then, what are the systems that you have in place for hiring and promotion? Who's being left out of that? We're talking more about social justice issues. We're talking more about opportunity for everyone. And we're seeing more requirements put upon companies. So the ESG movement, right? The social governance, environmental, social, and governance reporting, we're seeing standards coming out, and they're talking about human capital standards. And in SEC reporting, there's now a requirement for some large public companies to report any material information related to human capital. So like if a human capital situation can cause a material financial impact on your organization, you got to report something about that. And so like these are reasons to start thinking more deeply about what your company is doing and how you're doing it. And I've been recently conducting a lot of research on these international standards for reporting. And I can tell you that there are numerous international organizations working on it, and they're coming out with recommendations for metrics. Some of the metrics look at age reporting. Some companies have begun reporting age metrics around hiring and size of their total workforce by age. So the more we see those things, the more we're going to start thinking about how are we treating the different generations or age groups in our workforces, and who are we cutting out, and what's our liability or potential risk for doing that. And then one of the last areas where I think we can all have an impact, depending on who you are or what company you work for, there are attempts at the legislative angle to improve some of these older worker situations. So there are the Protecting Older Workers from Discrimination Act is a bill that passed the House last summer, has not passed the Senate as of yet, and obviously may not, or not much passes anywhere anymore. But this would restore the burden of proof to what it was pre-2009 for age discrimination suits. And then there's another bill circulating, Protect Older Job Applicants Act, and that's about keeping graduation dates off of required job applications. So those are things. So we try on the legislative front to get the law restored and to increase protections. We try within our DEI programming to address it. We try with raising awareness, and we try by trying to change attitudes and stereotypes. And one final point I'd like to mention here is so an older worker faces age discrimination. If you're a woman, you may be facing sex discrimination. If you're an older woman of color, you may also be facing racial or ethnic discrimination. You can just keep adding the different dimensions of diversity to the conversation, and you'll see that the situation gets worse. We talk about intersectionality in these diversity conversations, that it's, okay, you're a woman and you have age discrimination, but I think of it more as a exponentiality, because if you're a woman and you're an African-American woman and you're an older woman, and maybe you're of a certain religion, and it's not the most popular religion in your workplace, like you just keep layering it on, it's an exponential amount of discrimination and barrier that you might face. So I think these are all very important conversations, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I have one. I'm fascinated by the intersectionality between the pay equity piece in DEI and ageism.
Mhm.
And I have a theory, and you may have the numbers, but I think women in particular, experienced women who've had successful careers for 20 or 30 years, face the ageism in that we don't accept women looking older or acting older, right? We wear our makeup and dye our hair and put on the Spanx to tummy tuck and do all of that because we must look younger than we are. But also the equity piece of, I don't think we have employers that want to pay what an older worker would demand from a market perspective when they can get somebody who is younger and cheaper and do the same job. And I'm fascinated with what I still see as employers getting employees for the lowest dollar possible on the one hand, and then all of this lovely brochures and great photo ops on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'd appreciate your thoughts, Doctor.
So you are absolutely right. And you know, oftentimes when older workers are slated for departure, it is because the company is looking at, you know, salary levels and costs. They used to make the argument about health insurance cost for older people, but you know that we did some research back in 2015, and that's not necessarily true. Sometimes younger people, like say women in childbearing years, are much more expensive to insure in those moments, you know, than older people. But the pay equity question is really an interesting one. So I think about it this way. When I entered the workforce in 1989, I was a woman economist in the federal government, surrounded mostly by men. And I had a boss who said to me, this was after I had been there like a year, I'm not hiring any more women of childbearing age because all they want to do is have babies. And then I observed that, like, if a guy down the hall got married, he got a promotion. And if his wife had a baby, he got a promotion. And when I went in and, you know, and you were eligible for a step increase after 2 years. When I went in and said, you know, when can I expect my step increase? Oh, only if you get a job offer somewhere else. Otherwise, you know, you'll wait another year. Now, he didn't tell me if I got married, I could get the step increase. He told me I had to get a job offer to get an increase. And it was random, right? I had earned it. I was in good standing. I was an outstanding employee. But you know, so it took me longer to get my first raise. And over time, it took longer, right? And then you go to your next job. What's your salary? Okay, we'll pay you a little more than what you're making. And so the way the women's career salary progression was, it's like you got less to start, you got promoted less frequently, and then when you moved, you locked in that pay differential. And so we have a pay equity gap that actually is baked in the longer you have a job. And so that's one part of the pay equity. It's like, you know, and so we are seeing pay equity audits. We are seeing, as part of ESG reporting, companies are looking at this. What some companies have actually done is have brought salaries up and made them equal. But I can guarantee you, every company is not going to do this, and they're not going to want to do it. But there is something to this conversation about the female-male pay differential, and how it has, led us to have lower career earnings than others. So it's a very complicated issue. But I do think it's good that companies are thinking about it and that people are demanding attention be paid to these issues. It may be too late to help me, but hopefully it will help younger generations have a better shot at a more fair career pay level.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Trawinski, why was the burden of proof made more difficult?
So it was the result of a court case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. So it was, I guess, and I'm not an attorney, so I want to be clear on this. But my understanding of it is, right, it sets a precedent once a case is decided at the Supreme Court level, and so that anyone bringing a case after that point uses that as the new level of proof required. Ellen, is that correct?
Yes,
okay.
It is.
Yeah,
it is. And it's just too bad that we actually just seem to think that ageism is some kind of different kind of discrimination than sex and race or religion, we really just treat it as if it's not as bad. And this, the fact that it's got a higher standard is proof that, we really kind of think it's okay. It's okay to, just treat people who are older differently.
Mm-hmm.
Another question, is there or how strong is the gender component to age discrimination? Is it much higher for women or proportionate to the fact that women might live longer in the United States?
So in our older research looking, and this is, I'm speaking about survey research where AARP does a survey of people ages 45 and older. In the past, in past surveys, there was a larger differential between women and men, and women had reported it more frequently, having experienced it. And I think in the most recent survey, that was less true, that it was almost equal, the percentage of men and women who had seen it. So, but again, it's an odd question. It's, have you experienced it yourself or have you seen it? And so it wasn't, have you seen it against a man or a woman? It's just, have you seen any of it? So it's hard to unpack that. But I think, generally speaking, women face more discrimination than men. And it, like I said, it's that intersectionality, exponentiality, where it just one thing builds and builds and builds. And, it's unfortunate.
Lori, thank you so much for so many practical ideas that you laid out. It's really fascinating to me because we've had two conversations at Quorum over the last year. One where we had a really amazing speaker who talked to us about one of her biggest surprises as she moved through her career in healthcare and was very successful, was that nobody had ever mentioned that it would flatten out as soon as she got to her 50s, and that in fact your career as you consider it could be over at that point. So then you need to reinvent yourself. So that was sort of the discussion that happened, which was actually quite fascinating. And she was very bold. And it's the first time I've actually heard, except for this presentation, which we've been really excited about to have you come talk about it, because people don't want to talk about that age problem. She said, I feel like I owe it to everyone, given my experiences around that, to have that conversation. So she was very adamant about it, which was very, I don't know, it's uncomfortable, I guess would be the best way to describe it. I find it really uncomfortable being a woman in her 50s. I find that really uncomfortable. So the second conversation that we've had recently was really around this whole moment of the big resignation or the big, movement. And in fact, we talked about it as the opportunity moment, the positive, right? And it was such a great conversation. And it led me to believe, like,
Sorry.
couldn't this be a moment where
Baseball drinks.
where people could really think about being more open and inclusive to the type of employee they would have in. Because I feel like companies, I mean, I've seen it a million times in my own career and been forced to make decisions I didn't want to make, I'll be very honest, and did them also. So I'll be honest about that. I'm not proud of it. Where it was just the numbers, you've got X senior people, they cost this much money, they're out, and there was no discussion about actually the added value that those people bring, which was tenfold over someone that was cheaper, but less experienced, I mean, so which was my fight and I lost. So, that was kind of it. But there was a discussion about, well, could this be a moment where there's a new conversation? But what I loved about what you said was, unless you have the conversation, it's not going to change, I don't think. So that I don't know what your views are on that, but
yeah, I mean, I've spoken with companies who said, I would love to think about age diversity in our workforce, but I'm looking to save the company, and so we have to have lower cost employees. And in this particular company, they were closing some US facilities and moving production overseas because it was designed to save the organization. So I do understand that. I think where there's hope in this kind of a conversation is, as I'm teaching at NYU, and most of my students are younger people, and almost all of them work in HR. And when I bring up this concept of age, like, I see light bulbs going off in their heads, because they're like, I never thought about hiring an older person. Like, it's really a almost a foreign concept to some of these HR people. So, it's going to take time to have the conversation, but you're absolutely right. We have seen more people leaving jobs, and we right now in the US, we have over 11 million job openings that are unfilled. So, and I have written articles about the idea, why are we not looking at some older people for some of these jobs? Think differently.
I think it would be interesting if there were the data to see how many corporations, perhaps in the Fortune 500, have actually age mandates in their policies and handbooks. I was shocked when I worked for one of these major companies that they said you had to retire at age 65. That is ludicrous in so many ways, but I wonder if there's anything that could be done. Not that whoever said it, we can't anticipate Congress doing anything about it, particularly the age of many of the people in Congress and in government, but I wonder how we could investigate that.
Well, and it's interesting you bring that up, because we are looking at state law, because very, very often the state age discrimination laws they're almost always different from what's required at the federal level. And there are certain states that do allow mandatory retirement at age 65 or 70. It's one thing when it's like police and firefighters. If you think that there is a physical component to the job, but we also argue that age is not a physical component. And so if people go through physical testing and cognitive testing or whatever, and they pass these tests, there's not a reason to make someone retire. So we are looking at the state level as well to try to make some of these changes.
That's great.
That's a great point. Tara?
Hello, Lori.
Hey.
So I when you were kind of talking about, age being, a diversity factor in looking at employment, I've found in my conversations in recent years, whether, they've been internal to a company or external, that, people want the 15 years experience, but they don't realize that might make the person 40 until that's the applicant pool you're looking at. And it's like, how do you get this 15 years of professional experience by age, 28, right? The other thing that I try to dial up when I've been talking, to people about opportunities is that, I basically say, I've even seen questioning that say, what do you bring to the DEI conversation? And I say, I bring my career experience and my diversity of age. And when people say that, they kind of take a closer look to try and figure out how old I am. But I actually say, like, especially in certain, when you're talking to people, I'm in financial services. And when you talk to people about retirement, representation and how people show up is important. And I want to get my, advice, or I want to be able to relate to a speaker that looks like me, who might be sitting in my situation, who might be X years from retirement, because I feel like, we have shared experiences. And so my strategy is to just kind of bring it up in conversations with regard to like projects I'm working on, or just, it's helpful to remember history at some points to like, not to be like, we've done that before, but like, this plays out, or like the people you're talking to remember when this happened, and that may, that may affect their risk tolerance when they're investing. So, I feel like it's a good way to kind of deflect, but also to tell people that like age is, diversity of thought comes from diversity of experience, and you can't have that, if you haven't lived a little bit.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Patricia?
Oh, thank you. This has been so good. I want to share, which I haven't shared with anyone else. I just celebrated a milestone birthday this past weekend on March 26th. I am now 60. I can't even say that number without laughing. It seems ridiculous, but it's real. So just wanted to share comfortably in this group. We've got somebody in their 60s here. I don't know if there are others, but I'm here. I did want to say, oh, good. Hello. I did want to say, I'm a subject matter expert on higher education financing. I get interviewed by the press a lot. And I must say, like, probably 1 in every 3 interviews, they ask my age. I don't know why it's relevant. They've got my LinkedIn profile. I talk about the fact that I've been helping families for over 25 years. I say right back to the reporter, gee, why is that necessary for this article? And they say, well, it's just helpful to know. So I wind up saying I'm a member of the Gen X generation or something more general than that. But is this customary? Is that a journalistic, standard that you need to know somebody's age? I don't know why it's relevant to what I'm saying.
Do they ask men?
I don't know. I have no idea.
I do a lot of media interviews in my role at AARP, and I have not been asked my age. But what I will sometimes do if I'm doing a talk about age, I'll say, although I am a boomer, I identify as millennial.
Okay, good.
And that really throws them off.
Sounds good. I might lead on that. Thank you.
Love it. Well, Lori, I can't even believe that the hour has gone by. Isn't that insane?
It is. I thought I just started.
I feel like we learned, you shared so much amazing information. We learned so much, and you gave us actually 6 points, and I wrote them down. So I'm just gonna repeat them, but you're allowed to tell me if I forgot anything important. Will you make sure to tell us that?
Sure, absolutely.
Quorum always tries to end all their meetings focused on how we can take action, and you so beautifully presented that to us. So first of all, thank you for that. It's amazing. But you talked about, first and foremost, us all doing some self-reflection around what we think about age and how we talk about it, and how that comes up or is involved in our world. So I think that's an amazing first step as well, and something we could all take on as a group and commit to each other, about thinking about our role and in understanding age and what that means, and potentially our own biases around that. You also talked to us about the notion of staying a continuous learner. And I think that's such a fabulous concept in general. And So this group in general, because I know so many of you so well, I think that's already part of your DNA, but it's certainly something that we can continue to encourage others and ourselves to be open to constantly, being out there in a state of learning. So I loved that. That's always a good reminder. The third thing you talked about was paying attention to biases. So that kind of touched on the first one as well. And I think that's really, really critical. All biases are critical, but since the age conversation doesn't happen very often, I love the idea of calling that out quite specifically. So thank you for that. The fourth thing that you talked about is pushing within our own organizations the DE&I agenda, because it hasn't, age hasn't been involved, hasn't been a big part of the conversation, or enough of a part of the conversation, let's put it that way. So that's probably something almost all of us can do, is how do we help push our organizations to think about how that shows up in at our organizations, and work with the DE&I group to think about that. And you talked about the places around hiring and promotion. That's the next one. And how does your organization do it, and how are you doing it, and how are you thinking about it? And I loved the personal part about it, because so many of us get involved in that. And so I think that's a great call to action for us, is to really think about how we're thinking about age as it relates to the hiring and promoting process. And then finally, you did talk about policy, and if and when there's a chance, whether it's probably even policy within your own organizations, which was something Jane brought up, or beyond, as you're talking on the state or federal level, how we all might show up or participate in thinking about all of this. Unfortunately, I fear most of the folks on this call have experienced some form of ageism throughout their career, or have feared it, if nothing else, or have heard things being said, or have been asked to do things all based on age. And so I think it's really important. It's such an important issue. I love that we're bringing that to the forefront. So Lori, I can't thank you enough. If we were in person, we'd give you this huge round of applause, but we're giving you a huge round of applause anyway. Maybe come back and talk to us again on the issue, because I actually think we could continue to raise awareness around it, and think about how we can all work on it together. So, we'd love to have you back at any time you want to come back. I'll just tell you that, because this conversation is so fascinating. I think there's more to be had. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. And everybody else, we're at the hour, so I'm going to let you go, but I'm going to remind you, a second action besides all these amazing actions that Lori gave us was Quorum has its big retreat coming up in May. Starts on the evening of the 20th through the 22nd, and it's taking place in Narrowsburg, New York. And we would love to have you. If you haven't signed up, we would love it if you could make it. It's going to prove to be our first in-person moment together, so I think it'll be very meaningful. We're really looking forward to it, and keep an eye out for all of Diane's fabulous emails, because we have amazing content coming up. So pay attention. How about that? That's it. I'm going to leave it on that. So great to see all of you, Lori.